Hey everyone, my name is Paul and I am a researcher at Rice University. What I want to do in this video is start a new kind of mini series on philosophy of science for scientists, engineers, and researchers. So I'm not going to assume you have any knowledge of philosophy or philosophical terms. I'm not even a philosopher myself, but as I'm learning this stuff, philosophy of science, and how it's been helpful to my research, I kind of wanted to share the love as it was and explain why I think these concepts are useful to other scientists, engineers, and researchers. So in this video, we'll just give an overview of what philosophy of science is and why you should care. And then in the next couple videos, what we'll be doing is just getting into how philosophy of science will be helpful to you in your research, hopefully. So what is philosophy of science and why should you care about it? Well, if you're watching this video, maybe you'd agree with this. I hope you would, that science is probably one of the most incredible human achievements ever. I mean, it's pretty much the backbone of engineering. It's the backbone of modern medicine. All these sorts of things come out of science. And what philosophy of science is doing is it's literally asking questions about science itself. You can think of it as a meta science. And some of these questions that philosophy of science are going to ask, and if you've ever thought of these questions, you've been doing, I guess, philosophy of science. Does science have any limits? Are there questions science can't answer? What even is science in the first place? This is called the demarcation problem, and we'll spend a lot of time on this. And then this is teleology, or what has to purpose. What is the purpose of science? How can we distinguish science from non-science? Is science constrained to a certain methodology or certain assumptions, or is it anything goes? These are the kinds of questions that philosophy of science likes to ask. And philosophy of science is actually a very strongly interdisciplinary field that's a combination of science, mathematics, and of course, philosophy. But there are specific branches in philosophy that I think are more relevant to philosophy of science than others. These include fields like metaphysics or ontology, which is really, I'm grouping these two together, but it's the study of existence, being, and reality. So obviously, if we think science is the discovery or inquiry into the natural world, we're going to want to ask questions about, well, what does exist? What is the natural world? These sorts of things. So that's what those words mean. Epistemology, this is the study of knowledge. So the difference between ontology and epistemology is ontology is really the studying of being or existence, whereas epistemology is a study of knowledge. So how do we know what things are true? There's a difference between something existing and us knowing that something exists. And epistemology is very closely related to philosophy of science. Once again, just the study of knowledge. And then ethics, study of values, right and wrong, etc. That brings back into philosophy of science. Are there ethical limitations of science? How do we answer these sorts of questions? These are other things that come out of philosophy of science that are very helpful. And then last but not least, history. How did science come about? Has it changed over time? Where is science going? What is the nature of scientific discoveries or investigation? These are all valid areas in philosophy of science. So it's just kind of looking into science from a historical perspective, from a critical perspective, from all these different perspectives, and really just trying to understand more about science itself. So, if you're new, what even is philosophy? Maybe if we think of philosophy of science as the combination of philosophy and science, we need to first ask the question, what is philosophy? And very simple, it is the love of knowledge. Philo is a Greek word, Greek root meaning love. Sophy is a Greek word meaning knowledge, so you put the two together. Philosophy is love of knowledge. It literally means love of knowledge. And the definition you're going to get is the study of the fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, and existence. Now, my definition of philosophy is a little bit different. It's the art of asking questions. A lot of people have different definitions of philosophy, but I think that love of knowledge comes when we ask questions and when we really just try to have an open mind about things. And sometimes that means asking questions and narrowing down our search. And it should be clear that science itself is actually a subset of philosophy. If philosophy is a study of the fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, and existence, and science is a study of the natural world is something that, at least for now, we can assume exists. And this is historically the case too. So science in the Western world really emerged as a branch of natural philosophy. It came out of philosophy and kind of became its own field. We can talk a little bit more about the history of science in that particular case. But once again, basically in Western culture, science came out of philosophy and was pretty much inseparable from it for probably almost 1,000 years. So that's pretty crazy to think about. So that's why if you're a scientist, I think you do owe it to yourself to learn some philosophy. Now, what is science? This is where things get interesting. This is where we have philosophy of science. One such definition is a systematic study of the natural world. Other people give the definition the use of the scientific method. But of course, we can ask questions about what these things mean. What is the natural world and what separates it from the supernatural? What is the scientific method? That doesn't really help us if we say science is the use of the scientific method. Now we need a definition of the scientific method. Here's a great definition, and the one that I think is probably the best. The use of observation, experimentation, and the testing of theories against the evidence obtained. And there's this kind of idea of testing theories and falsification that kind of gets into some people in philosophy of science that have been very influential. But then we can ask the question, are there some fields where experimentation is difficult, less scientific than others? Obviously, if you're doing a chemical experiment, you have a lab, you have a field, that's one thing. But then there are some fields like sociobiology or evolutionary psychology where if this is our definition, it's unclear that any of these theories can necessarily be tested. And that also includes historical things, claims about the past. If we can't falsify things about the past, can we really claim we can test these theories against evidence, or are we just inventing ad hoc explanations? And to what extent is that a scientific explanation? These are going to be the kinds of questions we're going to be asking here as people learning philosophy of science. So that's kind of really what I want to talk about. Now I want to talk a little bit about myself and why I'm interested in teaching this sort of stuff. Once again, I'm a researcher, not a philosopher. But this is, I think, helpful to you because I'm new to the field and I understand what it's like to actually learn it. So as I am learning and reading philosophy of science, I'm going to do my best to communicate it. I have a long history of teaching classes and designing classes and these sorts of things. And I think this is helpful versus me teaching something like signal processing, which I've been doing over a decade. I'm very good at signal processing, and I'm not always the best teacher at signal processing because I don't know what it's like to be in the headspace where none of it makes sense. Signal processing is like second nature to me, and as a result, it's sometimes difficult for me to teach it because I'm not always, to me, these things are obvious because I've actually put in the work for the last 10 years to do it. Whereas now, me teaching philosophy of science is useful because I'm brand new to the field as well, and I'm still reading the literature and hopefully communicating it effectively to other scientists and engineers and researchers who haven't done as much research into the literature. The other thing I want to say is learning philosophy of science, which I'm going to call POS, and epistemology have actually helped me become a better researcher. And this isn't just, pie in the sky type of ideas. It'll help you ask better questions. It'll help you design better experiments that have a better scope, better explanatory power, and as a result, you can make stronger, or at least, I don't want to say stronger conclusions, but more accurate conclusions that actually fit the data best. And then also just becoming a better thinker and being able to articulate your ideas better by learning philosophy of science, and epistemology is kind of related to philosophy of science in this particular way. I think these are very important aspects. Why do I care about this? Well, first of all, scientists need to know that when they stop doing science and start doing philosophy. Science has this incredible authority in the natural world. People claim, oh, science says this or that. This has a lot of authority. This has a lot of weight. Unfortunately, there are scientists or science communicators who end up doing philosophy when they don't realize it. And it's important that when they bridge this gap, that they realize they're doing philosophy and they read the relevant literature, just as we would expect when somebody claims to be making a scientific statement. They're familiar with the literature and they're able to cite their sources. It really pains me to see other researchers doing poor philosophy or disparaging it. Einstein has a quote, "The man of science is a poor philosopher." And here's a quote from Bill Craig, "The man who claims to have no need of philosophy is the one most apt to be fooled by it." So these should all be good reasons why, if you're a scientist, if you're a researcher, if you're claiming to be communicating truth, you are now doing philosophy. You use the word truth, you are doing philosophy. Also, there's a concern here about what a PhD means. A PhD literally means a doctorate of philosophy. Now, typically this means a philosophy in general as the love of knowledge, not necessarily like the field of analytic philosophy. But there's a question to think about. Has a PhD shifted meaning and become an RHD, a doctorate of research, rather than a doctorate of philosophy? Are people actually learning or graduating with PhDs anything about truth? Or are they just learning how to do research according to certain assumptions without understanding how those assumptions are justified or the historical basis for those assumptions? And if that's the case, one thing I think I want you to think about is, does a PhD mean something different now than it did 200 years ago or 100 years ago? And is that even a bad thing? Those are the kinds of questions we're going to be exploring and asking. The other thing, too, that I care very much about is as artificial intelligence becomes more prevalent around the world, we need to teach our students how to think and how to differentiate fact from fiction. There's going to be a lot of material out there that's written by AI that could be hallucinating, these sorts of things. It's important for students to actually understand how to think about truth and reality, and philosophy is going to allow us to do this. And that's why I think teaching philosophy is very important for scientists and engineers and researchers. Maybe not as much for engineers, but definitely for researchers who are communicating to the public. And last but not least, I guarantee learning this stuff will help you become a better researcher. It helped me become a better researcher, so I'm just trying to share the love and share what I've learned to a primarily non-philosophical audience. Thanks for watching. In the next video, what we're going to be doing is talking about the demarcation problem and what that even means. Talk to you later.